Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. The ceremony will begin in 2 minutes. Please silence your cell phones. As part of Alumni Weekend, today's ceremony is being broadcast live via the university Facebook page. You may find the video at ung.edu/recall, along with other virtual reunion activities. Contact any member of the North Georgia Corps Cadets Association for more details on recall. Ladies and gentlemen, and distinguished visitors, on behalf of the University of North Georgia, our University Corps Cadets Association, the Corps Cadets, and the Department of Military Science, we would like to welcome you to this year's Memorial Retreat Ceremony. I would like to introduce Cadet Sergeant First Class Stephen Grula, who will give today's invocation.
Good afternoon. I invite you to bow your heads and join me in prayer, if you so desire. Dear Heavenly Father, this monument that stands before us is your constant reminder that those who are named here are gone, but not forgotten. They were taken from this life into the next by your will. Though they may have suffered agony and pain, heartbreak, and hardship, you, O Lord, brought them into your heavenly home. There they join you in everlasting vigilance. These great defenders have done their duty. Their debts are paid. As it is written here, many have given much. These have given all. Truly, Almighty God, they gave their all. Watch over the families here today who are grieving for their loved one. They are the ones that need your loving grace. Strengthen those before you who wish to take up the mantle that these brave souls have left behind. May they be guided by their courage, sacrifice, and belief in your saving grace. Finally, Lord, have mercy on us sinners who have done you wrong. Remind us of the role models that we should follow to better serve your holy will. As it is written, the Lord is close to the brokenhearted and save those who are crushed in spirit. We ask all of this in your holy name. Amen.
Ladies and gentlemen, please stand for our national anthem sung by the UNG Patriot Choir under the direction of Dr. Jack Broman.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rockets' red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say, does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
Ladies and gentlemen, Colonel Tom Palmer, Commandant of Cadets, University of North Georgia.
Please be seated. Dr. Jacobs, general officers, Colonel Cummings, veterans, distinguished guests, alumni, parents, and friends of the Corps. Welcome to the University of North Georgia's annual Memorial Retreat ceremony. I would like to offer a special greeting to all of our graduates and friends who are viewing this ceremony from locations all over the globe via streaming video as a part of our worldwide alumni recall. Each year we come together on this sacred spot to pay tribute to our graduates who have died while serving their country, and to our alumni who have passed away since our last memorial retreat, and to students both military and civilian who have lost their lives while enrolled at North Georgia. I'm honored to participate in this ceremony, and I especially would like to thank the cadets who worked so hard to make this memorial retreat meaningful. The cadets of the Boar's Head Brigade have rehearsed several times this week, and they're standing tall to your front and your rear to experience this special occasion with you. As most of you know, cadets raise and lower the national colors on this memorial site every day, so they know what hallowed ground is. I would like to thank the entire Corps of Cadets, and especially our freshmen, for the daily duties they perform in order to keep our military traditions alive at North Georgia. I have a special word to all the freshman cadets. I would like for you to understand today that only a handful of colleges around this country acknowledge their war dead by remembering them in ceremonies like this one. You probably came here today because your squad leader told you to get in the formation. But I'd like to challenge each of you to return to this location on your own sometime in the next 2 weeks before you depart campus for the summer break, and read the names on these walls, Please read them slowly. Count them one by one. Each name represents a human being who is no longer with us. Each person was a cadet, or an officer, or a son, or a daughter, or a spouse, or a father, or somebody's best friend, or somebody amazingly like you. In times of war, most of the people who die in service to their nation are very young. Cadets, they're approximately your age. In fact, many cadets on the 4 monuments you see behind me represent young officers or soldiers who died in their 20s or maybe their early 30s, perhaps even 1 year or 2 after they graduated. Time on this earth is short. Personal relationships are precious, and we're all just passing through this continuum we call life. As you read these engraved names, I hope you will remember to cherish every minute that you are able to spend in the Corps of Cadets. Colonel Cummings always says, it's an honor to be in the Corps. And it's an honor to pay honor to our fallen comrades, and that's what we're doing today. Every year at this time, I renew my personal memories of those graduates and classmates who have died. For me, this is the most meaningful ceremony of the entire year. This ceremony reminds me to focus on that which is truly important. It convinces me that North Georgia must continue to produce the best Army lieutenants in America. It challenges me to ensure our students learn character development as well as an academic discipline. It reminds me that some of our graduates are still serving on foreign fields in harm's way. And finally, I hope and pray it inspires all of us to respect those who fought and died to preserve our way of life in America. My fellow alumni, I grieve today because once again, this year's list of names of deceased alumni includes some of my personal friends. I spent time in the Corps with them or at alumni functions. I miss them. My life was made better by having known them. Each was a selfless servant who influenced or led people either in the military or in the civilian sector. It dawned upon me this week that while serving as commandant, I inspected the rooms and uniforms of some of the students whose names I now read in granite. I know many people in this audience are also grieving today for your classmates or relatives or friends whose names you view. I want to remind you that next August and January, as our military orientation known as Frog Week begins, each new cadet will visit this site in a twilight formation and view the names of your classmates on all the monuments. On a personal note, I renew my promise to you that we will continue to teach the meaning of sacrifice to our students, and we will never forget the names of our friends who died in service to their country. And one final thought, as we honor the memory of our graduates who have passed on since our last retreat, let us not forget our North Georgia graduates who are fighting for our freedom by leading troops in the Middle East and other places today. At this time, I'm honored to introduce our guest speaker, Lieutenant Colonel Promotable Jason Williams. Jason graduated from North Georgia College and State University in 1988 with a degree in criminal justice. After his basic course, he was assigned to 2nd Squadron, 3rd Armored Cavalry Regiment, where he served as a troop fire support officer, mortar platoon leader, and a battery executive officer. During this assignment, he deployed to Bosnia in support of Operation Joint Forge. After completing his career course as a captain, he was assigned to 18th Field Artillery Brigade, where he again deployed to Iraq with a Joint Special Operations Task Force. Later, he was assigned to 1st Battalion, 321st Field Artillery, where he commanded a battery that deployed to Tikrit, Iraq. After completing the Command and General Staff College, he attended the School of Advanced Military Studies at Fort Leavenworth. Then he deployed with Headquarters 82nd Airborne Division to Afghanistan, where he served as a Future Operations Planner. And after redeploying, he was assigned to 2nd of the 319th Airborne Field Artillery, where he served as the Battalion S3 and Executive Officer. He deployed in this assignment to Ramadi, Iraq, in support of Operation New Dawn. After serving as the Deputy Brigade Commander in the 18th Fires Brigade at Fort Bragg, Jason was reassigned to the 10th Mountain Division, where he commanded the 3rd Battalion, 6th Field Artillery until the summer of 2015. After changing command, he attended the Joint Combined Warfighting School at Norfolk, Virginia, followed by an assignment to the Joint Staff, Washington, D.C. Here, he was selected to serve as Deputy Executive Assistant to the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. He is currently a U.S. Army War College Fellow at the Center for Strategic and International Studies in Washington, D.C. And I'm pleased to report that he has been selected for promotion to the rank of Colonel in command of the 10th Mountain Division Artillery at Fort Drum, New York. Climb to glory, Jason. Colonel Williams has a bachelor's degree from NGCSU, 2 master's degrees, one from the University of Oklahoma and the other from the Army School of Advanced Military Studies. His awards and decorations include the Bronze Star Medal with Oak Leaf Cluster, the Army Commendation Medal with V device, the Combat Action Badge, the Master Parachutist Badge, and the Ranger Tab. Jason is married to his college sweetheart, the former Shelley Graves of Stone Mountain, Georgia. They have 3 daughters, Anna Lee, Emma Kate, and Caroline. Ladies and gentlemen, please make welcome Lieutenant Colonel Jason Williams.
Colonel Palmer, thank you for that introduction. Sometimes it's hard to believe that I'm old enough for all those things to have happened. I tell Shelley from time to time, I feel like I could still be at North Georgia, and she'll always keep me grounded and say something like, well, you could as a professor. And so, this morning we were running, and I thought the same thing. My knees felt like, well, I don't know, maybe I couldn't still be at North Georgia. But Dr. Jacobs, Colonel Palmer, Colonel Cummins, general officers, distinguished visitors, Corps cadets, and most importantly, the Gold Star families and the families of those students who passed away while they were students here. Thank you very much for inviting me to be back here as your guest speaker. Truth be told, standing here, I'm not sure I'm worthy of the task, but I promise I'm going to do my best to honor the legacy of the Corps and represent the alumni to the best of my ability. Dr. Jacobs, I meant to tell you this earlier when we were inside, and then I decided I'd wait. I wanted to thank you for the letter you sent me recently when I was selected for brigade command. I had not received a letter from the university president since I had been notified of being on academic probation all those years ago. I'm actually kidding about that. I think Dean Heim sent me those letters. But anyway, thank you very much, sincerely. Over the years, I've received letters from superiors when I've been promoted or selected for command, but to receive one from the president of my university was truly special. Shelley and I remain committed to the Corps and to the university. I would like to welcome the families of those whose names are being added to the wall that honors those who have fallen, who have passed away while they were here at school. I know well the impact that the passing of a student can have on the student body. A few weeks before I was a frog, Chad Alessio passed away, and throughout my time while I was here in the Corps, his memory surrounded the Corps of Cadets. Chad was a member of the Colombo class of 1997, and a lot of times the bonds of camaraderie that exist in the cadet volunteer organizations are always tight. I mean, really tight, but perhaps never more so than in Chad's Colombo class. Over the years I was here, Chad's friends became my friends, and it was ultimately the influence of his friends and the death of another student, Nick Barina, that inspired me to overcome my fears and go out for Colombo as a junior. Chad's Colombo class was exceptional. Chad's Colombo class has gone on to lead exceptional lives, both in and out of uniform. I trust that in time, you will find that your student's legacy is similar. I'd also like to welcome the Lee family. I know with the recent passing of Weston's father, and here now seeing Weston's name on the wall, that your heart must be heavy. We are honored by your presence, and I am humbled by your strength and fortitude. I'd like to ask all of the Gold Star families and the families of our fallen students to please stand so we may recognize you and honor your presence. Please join me in a round of applause. Thank you very much for being here. This ceremony is always special, but it's always made even more powerful by your presence. The first time I came here was in the fall during Frog Week of 1994. It's a part of the ceremony that Colonel Palmer talked about earlier. Our cadre had taken us around to the other places on campus of significance, such as the Arch and the Scabbard and Blade Triangle. And when we got here that night, Colonel Chamberlain was standing here, and he was standing next to the Vietnam panel. Colonel Chamberlain is a graduate of the class of 1968, and when I was a frog, and the entire time I was a cadet, he was the professor of military science. That night when we got here, Colonel Chamberlain talked about the wall and its significance. He talked about the Vietnam marker and the 7 classmates whose names appear on there, to include his friend, Bob Phillips. Robert Bob Phillips, while a cadet, was a Sigma Theta. He was in the band. He was a distinguished military student. He was in the Scabbard and Blade, and as a senior, he was the brigade commander. Colonel Chamberlain and Bob Phillips had known each other in high school, came here to North Georgia together, graduated together, went to Ranger School together as Ranger buddies, and after Ranger School, went on to Vietnam. Bob Phillips was killed on the 6th of May, 1970, while serving as a company commander. That day, Bob Phillips' company was conducting a reconnaissance, an air assault reconnaissance into an area they had not previously been. When the first platoon landed, they discovered that they were immediately surrounded by the North Vietnamese. An order was given from a higher headquarters to not land any more aircraft on the LZ until the platoon that was on the ground could get control of the situation and re-secure the LZ. Bob Phillips selflessly influenced and encouraged and was able to get the pilot of his aircraft to land so that he could get out and join with his platoon. Once on the ground, Bob Phillips took charge of the situation and led his men to gain fire superiority and regain security of the landing zone. Late in the day, while laying smoke to bring in a medevac, Bob Phillips was killed by a sniper. Bob was posthumously promoted to captain, and he was awarded the Silver Star for gallantry. That night in 1994, when we were sitting here listening to Colonel Chamberlain, Vietnam was a distant war. It was the war that my dad and the dads of my friends had served in. Listening to Colonel Chamberlain that night didn't really change that, but it did make it serve as the catalyst for me as I was trying to come to grips with the reality of the life that I had chosen. It was 6 years or several years later, after I graduated and had my own combat experiences, that I came to learn the soldier never forgets 3 things. He never forgets the first time he's in combat with the enemy. He never forgets the first time he is nearly killed, and he never forgets when one of his friends is killed in action. It was for me, and all those things happened over the course of about 6 weeks in Iraq in 2006, and it was in those days that I was able to begin to appreciate what it was, what serving in Vietnam had meant to Colonel Chamberlain, and what it was he had been talking to us about that night in 1994. When I was a cadet, we all idolized Colonel Chamberlain. We all wanted to somehow be like him. He made us want to be better every day, listening to him in class, seeing him around, seeing him lead by example. But it was after my own combat experiences that I realized Colonel Chamberlain is who he is in part because of Bob Phillips. And in that way, Bob Phillips never really died. Because Bob Phillips lives in the heart of those who loved him, and he continues to live even now, 50 years later, in the lives of the guys like me who his friends influenced. For the last 17 years, my generation and now yours has been at war in Afghanistan and Iraq. And in that time, North Georgia has had 8 alumni give the ultimate sacrifice. And I have known 2 of them. Jeremy Chandler was a sophomore when I was a freshman. Jeremy was not in my company, but he was friends with some other sophomores who were in my company. And this group of guys they had this really incredible ability to where they led by example without any form of phony bravado and just through their own character and personal example. And it was in that context that I came to know Jeremy. Jeremy, as a cadet, was a Sigma Nu, and he was in Ranger Challenge. And when I think back on it now, and I think about all of us when we were cadets and how all the guys, and so many of us, to include myself, were all here trying to figure out who we are and what we wanted to be. And when I think about it, Jeremy wasn't like that. Jeremy knew who he was, and he knew he wanted to be. Even in college, Jeremy was a quiet professional. Through his everyday actions, through his leadership by example, through his quiet professionalism, he led others to be their very best. He trained other leaders. Over our time in school, Jeremy and I became friends, and I was not surprised when in 1997, when he commissioned, he branched infantry and went on to the 101st. Later on, Jeremy went to SFAS, ultimately joining 3rd Special Forces Group. Throughout Jeremy's time on active duty, he lived up to his North Georgia heritage, and he continued to lead by example. Jeremy earned the Ranger tab, the Special Forces tab, the Master Parachutist badge, the Master Military Freefall or Master Halo badge, the Combat Infantry badge, and the Bronze Star for Valor. Jeremy was killed in a training accident near Tarin-Kot, Afghanistan in 2005 while serving there for the third time. Jeremy's legacy continues here at North Georgia in a scholarship that bears his name. Each year, for the last few years, while my family and I have been stationed in D.C., we go to Arlington and late Reese at Christmas. And this past year, if you've never been to the cemetery to lay wreaths, you should go. And in Arlington, there's tens of thousands of people up there laying wreaths, and it's hit or miss if you'll get a chance to lay the wreath at the grave of one of your friends. But this past year, one of our daughters was able to lay the wreath at Jeremy's grave. It was a special day for her. It was a special day for my family. Jeremy lives forever in the hearts of the guys who went to school with him and in the lives of the soldiers that we've led. Kevin Jenneret was a senior when I was a freshman. I didn't know Kevin as well as I knew Jeremy because he was a senior, but because of his sort of larger than life and, dare I say, legendary presence on campus, we all knew who he was, and we all wanted to somehow become like him and my company commander, Tombo Jones. As a cadet, Kevin was in the aggressors. He was a Sigma Chi, and as a senior, he was the Delta Company commander. As a cadet, even as a cadet, Kevin was larger than life, tough as nails, and none of us were surprised when he branched infantry and after graduating from North Georgia went on to graduate from Ranger School. In fact, a few years later, Kevin became an instructor here at the mountain phase of Ranger School, and there's a monument up there that honors all the Ranger instructors who've died in combat, and his name is there. Truth be told, it was Kevin and the guys like Kevin who made me want to go to Ranger School. And like a lot of people, I got to go to Ranger School more than once. It's okay to laugh at that. That's pretty funny. The first time I went was only a few days removed from returning home from the invasion of Iraq. My Ranger School adventure ended early that year in 2003, and shortly thereafter, Shelley and I started our family, and it just became more and more difficult to get back. In fact, as the years went on, I thought I might never get back. And then finally, 9 years later, in fact, Shelley told me it was 6 years ago today, I had the opportunity to go back to Ranger School. And this time at 36 years old, I went straight through. It was the entire time I was in the course, it was thinking about guys like Kevin and the guys and so many other Rangers in my life, many of which I knew here from school, that served as motivation for me while I was going through the course. Kevin died alongside two other soldiers near Kapisa, Afghanistan, when an IED hit their vehicle in June of 2009. Like Jeremy, Kevin is memorialized here at school in a scholarship that bears his name. And like Bob Phillips and Jeremy, Kevin lives forever in the hearts of his friends like Tombo Jones and in the lives of guys like me who are influenced by his friends. A little less than a year ago, Shelley and I had the opportunity to go to Weston Lee's funeral. I did not know Weston, but after talking to his friends, know that Weston came from a good family where he was taught self-discipline, empathy, respect, and responsibility. Weston came here to North Georgia with no prior military training, and yet during Frog Week, he was named as the guidon bearer for his company. To come to school and in Frog Week be named the guidon bearer for your company with no prior military training speaks volume to the character instilled in him by you and Mr. Lee. After Frog Week, Weston joined the combat shooting team, one of only two freshmen to be on the team. Weston played rugby. Weston was in the SGA. Weston was in SAE. And as a senior, he served as a pre-camp TAC, where he had the opportunity to train and mentor and coach the class of 2015. More importantly, Weston was strong in his Christian faith, And Weston, through his daily walk and testimony, influenced his friends to lead lives of faith as well. Weston was killed in Mosul, Iraq, almost a year ago. In fact, April 29th, which is just a little over a week from now. It'd be 1 year. Weston, like Jeremy, is laid to rest in Section 60 at Arlington Cemetery. Last year, after my daughter laid the wreath at Jeremy's grave, we walked across Section 60 to visit Weston. When we got there, a wreath had already been laid, but there was a young lady there with her friend. And the young lady was wearing a 1st of the 325 Red Falcons t-shirt. Weston had been a platoon leader in 1st of the 325 when he was killed. I asked her if she knew Weston, and she said no, but that her husband had been in his platoon and he loved him. And because her husband had loved and respected him so much, she wanted to visit his grave. Love and respect like that, that tells you what kind of character and what kind of leader Weston was. Like Kevin and Jeremy, Weston lives forever here at North Georgia in a scholarship that bears his name. And Weston lives in the hearts of a lot of people who loved him, a lot of who were here. And he'll live in the lives of the people who you lead when you leave school. So here we are. What does it all mean? As a North Georgia cadet, and later when you graduate, the expectations of you will be higher than that of other people from other schools. People like Bob Phillips, Jeremy Chandler, Kevin Jennerette, and Weston Lee submitted that legacy long before you ever arrived. When you get to your first unit, you will be expected to be professional, mentally and physically tough, and to be an expert in small unit leadership. The specifics of your branch and the specifics of your job you will learn in time, but professionalism, toughness, and small unit leadership will be expected upon arrival. While you're here at North Georgia, you will learn those skills, but to become an expert in it requires repetition in tough and realistic environments. Colonel Chamberlain's generation used those skills in Vietnam. Graduates from the 70s and the 80s used those skills in a place called the Fulda Gap in a Desert Storm. My generation used them in the Balkans, Afghanistan, and Iraq. The same will be true for you. If you are not already a member of Colombo, the Aggressors, or Ranger Challenge, I recommend that this summer you do some reflection and consider next year trying out for one of those units. If you will be a senior next year, I recommend you consider volunteering to be a pre-camp TAC as a way of honing your leadership skills as you teach them to others. To be sure, living up to your North Georgia heritage, living up to the legacy is a challenge. It is something that even now, 20 years later, drives me every single day. I pray the same will be true for you. Thousands of graduates who stood in that formation, some of whose names are now on this wall, and the soldiers who you will prepare and lead in combat deserve nothing less. Thank you so very much for letting me be here today. It's been an honor beyond description and means more to me than you'll ever know. Thank you.
North Georgia has always sought ways to honor alumni who have fallen in battle. Many alternatives were considered to find an acceptable memorial in remembrance of those alumni who were killed in battle, as well as those students who had lost their lives while attending North Georgia College and State University, and the University of North Georgia. The initial phase of construction on the memorial to your front was completed in April 1983 and dedicated in May of that year. The final phase of construction was completed with the unveiling of a bronze American Eagle entitled Freedom's Vigil in May of 1986. The memorial is divided into two sections. The first section honors those who gave their lives in battle, while the second honors students who died while attending North Georgia College and North Georgia College State University and the University of North Georgia. There are 13 names on the World War I section. There are 12 names on the Korean War section. There are 113 names on the World War II section. There are 29 names on the Vietnam War section. If there are any family members in attendance today of these great Americans, please stand and be recognized. Thank you. 12 years ago, on April 22nd, 2006, during Parents Alumni Weekend, we dedicated the Lost in Combat Memorial to your front to recognize the North Georgia alumni and students who have been killed in combat since September 11, 2001, fighting the global war on terror. There were 4 names dedicated that beautiful April day. Staff Sergeant Thomas Vitigliano, Staff Sergeant Charles Warren, Captain Jeremy Chandler, and Specialist Paul Saylor. During our 2009 ceremony, we added our 5th name to the marker, the name of Master Sergeant Mitchell W. Young. In 2010, we added our 6th and 7th name to the marker, Major Kevin Jenrette and Sergeant Andrew McConnell. In 2018, we will add our 8th name to the marker, First Lieutenant Weston Lee, class of 2014. Weston was killed in action while on patrol in and around Mosul, Iraq on 29 April 2017 while serving with 1st Battalion, 325th Infantry Regiment, 2nd Brigade Combat Team, 82nd Airborne Division, Fort Bragg, North Carolina. Will the family members and friends of First Lieutenant Weston Lee please stand and be recognized? Thank you. If there are any family members in attendance today of the other 7 great Americans, please stand and be recognized. Thank you. Each year, we read the names of alumni and students who have died since our last service to consecrate the memorial. There are 71 names on the student section. There are 3 student names to be added to the memorial wall this year: Ross Morcom, Charles Boykins, and Teresa Watterson. Will the family and friends of these students please stand and be recognized? Thank you. Deceased alumni and friends since our last service are
Miss Isla Stargle Jones, class of 1929. Mr. Harold Hammond, class of 1939. Colonel retired Woodfin Lipham, class of 1939. Miss Benelli Lawson Valentine, class of 1941. Miss Edith Bradford Ergel, class of 1942. Dr. Roy Joyner, class of 1942. Miss Maddie Barton Lambert, class of 1942. Mr. Claude Williams, class of 1942 and former board member. Dr. Talmadge Martin, class of 1943. Ms. Frances Irwin Olive, class of 1943. Mr. Eddie Sims, class of 1943. Mr. John Williamson, class of 1943. Mr. Simon Bell, class of 1946. Miss Doris King Dickinson, class of 1946. Mr. James Gregory, class of 1948. Colonel retired James Burdett, class of 1949. Mr. Robert Hodges, class of 1949. Miss Theda Burrell Laudermilk, class of 1949. Mr. Carter Stout, class of 1949. Miss Mary Helen Thomason, class of 1949. Miss Betty Leard Carter, class of 1950. Miss Leona Clack Garner, class of 1950. Mr. Charles King, class of 1950, former Real Estate Foundation member. Mr. Robert Seidel, class of 1950. Mr. Robert Blasingame, class of 1951. Mr. Wilburn Hawkins, class of 1951. Mr. John Holmes, class of 1951. Mr. Joseph Kennedy, class of 1951 and former board member. Mr. Thomas Rutherford, class of 1951. Dr. John Sims, class of 1951. Lieutenant Colonel retired George Brookshire, class of 1952. Mr. William Carswell, class of 1952. Mr. Boyd Jordan, class of 1952. Mr. Don Long, class of 1952. Miss Helen Carmichael Threkeld, class of 1952. Mr. Cyril Kane, class of 1952. Mr. James Bahanan, class of 1953. Miss Barbara Duncan Kellogg, class of 1953. Miss Betty Farguson Blasingame, class of 1954. Mr. J. Edge, class of 1954. Colonel retired Robert Ellington, class of 1954. Sergeant retired Joe Whitaker, class of 1954. Miss Nancy Schumacher Hadaway, class of 1955. Mr. Clarence Lamb, class of 1955. Mr. Joseph Martin, class of 1955.
Mr. George Potter, class of 1955. Colonel Wortley Elliott, class of 1956. Fred Shirley, class of 1957. Colonel Aquila Stipe, class of 1957. Mr. Jeer Greer, class of 1957. Miss Joanne Long Kavanaugh, class of 1958. Mr. Hal Crawford, class of 1958. Mr. Paul Stallings, class of 1958. Lieutenant Colonel retired Thurman Sturdivant, class of 1958. Mr. John Cavender, class of 1959, former council member. Lieutenant Colonel retired Marion Mann, class of 1959. Lieutenant Colonel John Patterson, class of 1959. Miss Shirley Shockley, class of 1959. Mr. Walter Snelling, class of 1959. Mr. Wallace Ziprick, class of 1959. Mr. James Baggett, class of 1960. Miss Jane McWilliam Dye, class of 1960. Miss Martha Cook Hamrick, class of 1960. Mr. Ernest Richards, class of 1960. Mr. Frederick Horn, class of 1961. Lieutenant Colonel Bryant Sneed, class of 1961. Colonel retired Conrad Botterweg, class of 1962. Miss Shirley Laddie Jones, class of 1962. Miss Judith Griswold Sager, class of 1962. Mr. Donald Seegers, class of 1962. Miss Faye Wright Bowman, class of 1963. Mr. Alfred Jones, class of 1963. Miss Carolyn Denman Midkiff, class of 1963. Mr. Jimmy Hill, class of 1964. Mr. George Moore, class of 1964. Miss Peggy McClure Smith, class of 1964. Mr. John Holmes, class of 1965. Mr. Felix Ville, class of 1965. Mr. John Caldwell, class of 1966. Mr. William Aiken, class of 1967. Major Retired William Babb, class of 1967. Mr. Terry Wellborn, class of 1967. Major Retired Paul Borowski, class of 1968. Mr. Howard Lipham, class of 1968. Mr. Charles Chafin, class of 1971. Dr. Sarah Bradford Mallory, class of 1971. Mr. Larry Orr, class of 1971. Mr. Harry McDonald, class of 1972. Miss Jennifer Crane, class of 1974. Mr. Thomas Turner, class of 1974. Miss Stella Dearman Weisinger, class of 1974.
Mr. Mark Hopkins, class of 1975. Lieutenant Colonel retired David Johnson, class of 1975. Major retired Jeffrey Routh, class of 1975. Miss Sarah Henley, class of 1976. Mr. Gary Kennedy, class of 1976. Miss Maudie Thiel Lefchick, class of 1976. Mr. Carlos Pinion, class of 1976. Mr. William Porter, class of 1976. Miss Caroline Tomlin, class of 1976. Mr. Charles Abbott, class of 1977. Colonel retired Perry Buddy Bridges, class of 1977, and former council member. Captain retired Stephen Mudd, class of 1977. Major retired Edward Wannick, class of 1977. Miss Patricia Coker Thomas, class of 1978. Mr. Frank Schmerker, class of 1978. Lieutenant Colonel retired Michael O'Hauplin, class of 1980. Mr. Kirk Brookshire, class of 1982. Mr. Jackie Conley, class of 1982. Mr. James Jensen, class of 1983. Mr. Paul Shirley, class of 1983. Mr. Alan Wilson, class of 1983. Mr. Joseph Rogers, class of 1985. Miss Lisa Smith Schmidt, class of 1986. Ms. Christine Turner Guardo, class of 1987. Ms. Cecily Contos Brooks, class of 1988. Ms. Elizabeth Cornelius, class of 1994. Mr. Randall Robertson, class of 1996. Miss Amy Hertz Evers, class of 2004. Major Kyle Taffel, class of 2004. Mr. Randy Sherrill, class of 2012. First Lieutenant Weston Lee, class of 2014. Mr. Cameron Martin, class of 2015. Mr. Taylor Wagner, class of 2016. Mr. Benjamin Brown, class of 2017. Ms. Gabrielle Hunter, class of 2017. Mr. Luis Salazar, Jr., class of 2017. Mr. Michael Shannon, class of 2017. Ms. Farrell McDonald Anderson, parent. Ms. Carol Blasingame, honorary alumnus. Mr. Benjamin Brown, former staff. Dr. James Chestnut, retired faculty. Miss Mary Rice Cleveland, friend of the university. Mr. Charles Cosgrove, friend of the university. Miss Marjorie Fouts, friend of the university. Miss Tomaline Henley, retired staff and former board member. Mr. William Lee, parent.
Dr. George Odinger, retired staff. Dr. Dave Pandrus, retired faculty. Dr. Lawrence Sorahan, retired faculty. Mr. George Thomas, friend of the university. Miss Charlene Turner, friend of the university. Miss Linda Woods Whitlock, friend of the university. Dr. Linda Woodruff, retired faculty. Will the family members of those alumni names read today please stand and be recognized? Thank you. Each year, we place a wreath at the memorial to commemorate all of the alumni who were killed in battle, all the alumni who have passed away since last year's ceremony, and those students who lost their lives while attending the University of North Georgia. This year's wreath, honoring all of our alumni and students who have passed away since this time last year, will be placed by Miss Aldine Lee, mother of First Lieutenant Weston Lee. Serving as wreath bearer today is Cadet Private First Class Amanda Johnson of Delta Company. Several cadet units are participating in today's ceremony. Representing the Blue Ridge Rifles is the firing detail commanded by Cadet First Sergeant Mark Henley. The ceremonial color guard is led by Cadet Staff Sergeant Paris West of Bravo Company. Serving as buglers are Benjamin Vickery and Bradley Andrew. Serving in the Howitzer section from Headquarters and Headquarters Company and the Scabbard and Blade Military Honor Society are Cadet Lieutenant Colonel Anthony Twitty, Cadet Major Hayden Pilgrim, and Cadet First Lieutenant Andrew Gomez. Representing the Corps Cadets is the Honor Company for Fall Semester 2017, Golf Company, under the command of Cadet Captain Connor Bain. It is led today by Cadet First Lieutenant Mark Broom. The First Sergeant is Cadet Christopher Bissett. Ladies and gentlemen, please rise for the playing of Retreat and To the Colors.
Order. Arm. Post. Extend. Colors. Spread. Colors. Northward, haste. Forward, march.
We do not formally end our ceremony because we continue to remember our fallen comrades, graduates, and students throughout the year.
I knew a man called him Sandy Kane.